So, first of all, I'd like to say that this is not the final outcome of our research. Like, we were in the process of collecting data about Blumenbach in Russia, and as kind of a week ago, I think Nicholas Rubke called us and said, like, guys, could you please present? And we said that we're not done. We can present only the state of affairs, right? So this is not a ready-made research. This is just a report on the state of affairs, and like I talked about, prospective research. So we are talking about Blumenbach in Russia. And first of all, we are confronted here with a fundamental methodological problem when we are talking about Russia and influence of something on Russia. Like, what is Russia? The problem that today, currently, Russia has, I think, 27 official languages, state languages, right? Maybe 32, I don't remember exactly, but dozens of languages. Same problem existed in the Soviet Union, 15 republics, 15 official languages, state languages, and within the republic, there were several languages. At the time we are talking about, the Blumenbach's time, there was no official state languages because there was no constitution, as we know, but the problem of regional languages existed. And one of these regional languages was German. And correspondingly, when we're talking about influence of German-speaking scholars on Russian science, we must define what we're talking about. Classical example, Karl Ernst von Baer. As I was a student, we have learned that Baer was Karl Maximovich Baer. He was a Russian scientist, and he was a Russian citizen, the member of the academy, a very influential figure in Russia, and various, like, for example, famous Ukrainian poet Shevchenko, when he was in troubles, he wrote a letter to Karl Ernst von Baer, asking him for help. So this shows that Baer was deeply integrated into Russian affairs. He was an influential figure, but the problem is that Baer was actually German. So he will now open Universität, the journal, or other recent publications of Baer. You will read something like he was a Baltic German, he was Estonian, he was a German, Baltic German, Estonian, and so on, without even mentioning Russia. And he was certainly, it makes sense because he was certainly, despite of his great involvement to Russian affairs, he was part of the German discourse, and so there was certain influence of Blumenbach on Karl Ernst von Baer, but methodological question, was Blumenbach's influence on Baer an influence on Russia or influence in Russia? No, this is a problem. Now, we have decided that when we are talking about Blumenbach's influence and other German-speaking guys' influence on Russia or in Russia, we mean the influence on Russian discourse. That means the Russian language scientists, Russian language philosophers, Russian language scholars. And correspondingly, what? Okay. No. Nope.
Now it should work.
Good. What did that? Okay. Correspondingly, we are looking for general indicators according to this methodology. So we are interested first of all in translations. Were their translations of Blumenbach's works into Russian? We are interested in his membership in scientific societies, circulation of his Russian publications in Russia, like how many people knew or were there ordinary, just normal students, were they aware of Blumenbach's publications? Then, because Nicholas asked us to talk about Nexus Formativus, very preliminary report about specifically about Nexus Formativus in Russia. This will be amazing because it's very idiosyncratic. And then conclusions. Wait, does it work? It doesn't look like this. Oh, it suddenly works. Okay. The picture is absent. There should be a picture. I don't know what happened. It was a cover of the book, and it was important. It was important because on this cover, you could see the date of publication of the book. It's 1796. And for externalists among you, you may be like hearing this date, you may be inclined to think that this publication was a result of the rule of enlightened absolutism of Catherine the Great. But you know, we are historians of science. We don't discuss things in black-white categories. And this date has 1796, has double meaning. 2 months before Catherine the Great died, she introduced in Russia obligatory censorship. So all books, according to this law, all books published in Russia were supposed to be censored. And the core of this censorship, and this is, I think, important for our story, the core of the censorship was correspondence of a publication to the law of God. No? So all published materials should be compatible with orthodox beliefs. And this is a never-ending story. And like when we're talking about evolutionary theory, like Orthodox Church certainly did not like Hegel, did not much like Darwin, but for example, like Wallace, Alfred Russel Wallace, very much. So the problem was to make any publication compatible with requirements of censorship. And that is probably why the book was called Physiology or Science of Human Nature, although it's originally Institutiones Physiologica, and the English translations are close to Latin original. As far as I know, you know it better than me, like Elements of Physiology or Institutions of Physiology. So here was the accent was on physiology. The whole introduction to the book, the whole layout of the book, and makes an impression that, guys, like, we are not doing here fundamental research. We are not threatening the law of God. We are just writing something applicable, very practical for medical doctors. This is illustrations, just to show you that the book was well illustrated for those times. Why all pictures are absent? A couple of words about the translator. Bosuk Moiseev was Jewish born in Ukraine, converted to Christianity, presumably converted to Christianity, but we do not know much about him, presumably converted to Christianity to avoid the Pale of Settlement, which existed in Russia. Just it was introduced there several years before that, as for all Jews. And he made a kind of career. He is regarded as the first medical PhD in Russia at all. He lost his position quite early in his career, and in his remarks of the HR of the university, we read that he could not resist to a scene, and so we understand it like he was an alcoholic. Like this irresistible sin is just alcoholic. So he became. And finally, we have pictures. So this is also interesting that this physiology or science of human nature, written in Latin with 4 pictures, with four pictures of medical science. So this everywhere, as I said, it's stressed that it's medical science and by professor and member of the King's Göttingen Scientific Society, Blumenbach, published in Moscow. This is what I'm talking about. This is the statement of censorship. It was not always like published in the book, usually not. But in this case, we see that the censor Andrei Bryantsov, who was professor of logic and metaphysics of the same university, and at the same time censor of the university. It's kind of today professors also do some duties. And he found nothing that would contradict to the instructions he received. And we think that this censorship story is responsible trying, like for making the book very, Russian edition, very applicable. Yeah, so like all the direction. This is not fundamental research, but this is something for medical doctors. This is the second translation of Blumenbach, published just next year. Why we suddenly see covers, and we couldn't see that before. In this case, translated from German and published in 3 volumes. As you may already see that these 3 volumes, Russian translation is much more voluminous than German original. Like much more voluminous than German original. And we do, by the way, but the first book, nowhere in the introduction, nowhere in the introductory materials, we read whether it's a complete translation of Institutiones Philologica or excerpts. Like we didn't compare now word by word, but Alexander Wolf compared this 2 books and found that actually it's complete translation. Here it's more than complete translation, and it's much more voluminous. And one of the explanations why the Russian translation is more voluminous than the original, because Russians translated also Latin terms, which Blumenbach used in Latin, and Russians used both. So the Latin and the translation, and this made the publication so voluminous. Here we see that he was not only, Blumenbach was not only professor of Göttingen University, but also British Chancellor in Arms. I translate, especially, I translated how it sounds in Russian. Yeah? Translated by 2 teachers of natural and civil geography. And they were indeed teachers. And the translation was, like the objective of this translation was to give this book as a handbook in natural history to teaching, if directly translated, they call teaching training seminaries. So it's kind of colleges, so it's not a university. So it was a textbook. So it's like teaching, training, seminaries, and what is even maybe more important at the moment, one of these translators, Tirayev, he was a teacher at the moment of translation. Later, he became a professor of pedagogical university in St. Petersburg. And at the same time, he was also a professor of women's education society. And that means that this book was one of the first books read by young female scientists in Russia. Indirectly, all this shows because these translations were used for educational purposes, we may allow us to think about generations and generations of male and, again, female students who were acquainted with Blumenbach's work in Russia. This is the illustration from the book, and also the book was later used in grammar schools. I'm never been sure how to say it. This is was in German Gymnasien. It's probably grammar schools, right? High schools of high level, but you know, because you all speak German, you know what. The third translation. The third translation was from French, And with this translation, it's enigmatic story. So nobody of us saw the original of this book. Only thing we know is that in the catalog of 88, the book was marked in St. Petersburg. The book was marked as lost. In the same year, in St. Petersburg, happened an absolute disaster. It was disaster of the century. The library of the Academy of Sciences burned. 3.5 million of books were destroyed. 3.5 million of books were destroyed. So we think this is not, no librarian approved this hypothesis, but we think that the book disappeared in the fire of 1988 burning in St. Petersburg. So we saw the library card, we saw citation of the citations, but we never saw the book. And by the way, astonishingly, there is also a collection of Blumenbach's books in Novosibirsk, so not only in St. Petersburg and Moscow, but also in Novosibirsk, nothing is there. Alexander Lvov is currently in Novosibirsk. One more indicator of Blumenbach's influence. This is so-called Brookhouse and Efron Encyclopedia. This is the most influential encyclopedia in pre-revolutionary Russia. As a teenagers, we used this encyclopedia to learn about things forbidden in the Soviet Union. And here you see the article on Blumenbach. It's not large, but it's also not short. It somehow corresponds to our impression of his influence in Russia. So it was kind of middle range influence. Yeah? Here, what we read in the encyclopedia, first of all, we read that he was a famous natural scientist. This is already a good sign. Then his biography, born in Gotha, studied in Jena. His greatest deserves are in the field of comparative anatomy. Greatest deserves in the field of anatomy. And his greatest book here is Handbuch der vergleichenden Anatomie, translated to almost all European languages, as we read here, but not in Russia. His favorite subject was natural history of human. He divided humanity in 5 races, and this view dominated science until the very last moment. Besides his collections, I mentioned, and last but not least, here your favorite über den Bildungsweg and das Zeugungsgeschäft, as a physiologist, he attracted attention to himself by publishing this treatise. He was also a member of the Russian Academy of Sciences, and there was sort of this picture made by us. And this is what you can see on the side of the official side of the Academy of Sciences. Okay. Now, Tunisius Formativus. There was this guy, professor of the Surgical Medical Academy, which is now exists until now. It's a military medical academy in St. Petersburg, and he was regarded as one of early evolutionists in Russia. There is a term in the history of science, Russian science, introduced by Rykov, the pre-Darwinian Russian evolutionists. So he is regarded as one of, it is contestable, by the way. But the term. But he seemed to be really kind of evolutionist. Okay. I mean, when you read Kareninov, you'll find that he wrote in kind of a gloomy 19th century language. And it's not always easy to understand what actually he's writing about. Or better to say, you never really understand what it's all about. Yeah. So you can interpret into his writings many things. But this is his impression from platinum to man. Why from platinum? Because platinum was for him a kind of embodiment of inorganic. The type was the type of inorganic matter. He wrote about evolution, even about gradient evolution. And evolution was for him a general law which didn't need further explanation. So just accept it as it is. And he introduced, actually, in his lecture to us, we're not sure exactly when, probably 1837, and he mentioned in several publications, Nexus of Granite, but converted it in plural, in Nexus of Granite. And somehow one can understand this Nexus of Granite as many efforts of various kinds, observable, influencing evolution. His publications were controversial. So this book, for example, was devastatingly criticized by Karl Ernst von Baer. There's no written review of the book. There are notes of his speech on at the so-called Conference of the Academy of Sciences. So this is kind of gathering of leading members of the Academy, and Karl Ernst von Baer said that this is Nichtigkeit, this is the shame of Russian science, this is nothing, just forget it. So he was controversial already at that time, and now we make a jump to Kozopolansky. Because, who was Kozopolansky? Kozopolansky was one of several Russian guys who championed symbiosis theory. And Kozopolansky was a champion not only of symbiosis theory in general, but of endosymbiosis theory in terms of Lynn Margulis. And that's why Lynn Margulis was very keen to translate the book and to write an introduction. He offered me first to do this and to write an introduction, but after several conversations, I decided not to participate in this project because somehow he should try to make Kozopolansky very modern. And we are historians of science. We like to stay in the time we are researching. It was done in the translation by Victor Fett, who resided for a while in Uwe Husfeld's house. And Kozopolansky published a paper specifically on Granite with the title Naturphilosopher Granite. And in this paper, Kozopolansky reinterpreted or interpreted this nexus of Granite and introduced Russian terms. So he spoke on Nixa, singular, and nixi plural. What he meant was that this nixi, which actually must be traced back to Blumenbach, this nixi were comparable to aeromorphosis of Alexei Ceratop. So aeromorphosis is this relatively sudden evolutionary change, like in the symbiosis, right? That's why Kozapolansky was personally interested in it, or like introduction of the four-chamber heart, which accelerates evolutionary development. And this brings us here. Okay, if it is true what Kozapolansky is right, is if this nixi is comparable with the morphosis of Ceratop, and here this is Ceratop, and this is Ivan Schmalhausen, the absolutely central figure of the Russian modern synthesis, who adopted the term aeromorphosis from his teacher Ceratop. So if it's true, it's not true. But if we follow Kozapolansky, we can make a connection between Blumenbach and modern synthesis in Russia. Fairly speaking, this idea of Kozapolansky was criticized already by his contemporaries and by historians of science, like Granite over-interpreted Blumenbach, and Kozapolansky over-interpreted Granite, who over-interpreted Blumenbach. Conclusions. There are three translations, one of which we couldn't get. And two of them were used as textbooks for medical students and even for school students and for in the female education society. That means that the ideas of Blumenbach were circulated in Russia, Further indication of his prominence in Russia was his inclusion into the workhouse and the front, and his membership in the Russian Academy. Blumenbach's Nexus of Granite became kind of an anecdotal story in the history of Russian science. And generally, I would say Blumenbach was kind of middle range influence in Russia. So he wasn't a big thing like Karl Ernst von Baer, right? He was influence, so was middle range, stable influence, but not like as prominent as his other language-speaking contemporaries who lived in Russia, which is understandable. Thank you for your attention.